Hi, everybody. Sorry about this whole ordeal. Trying to get this software updated on my computer has been a nightmare, but hopefully this will work. I am recording this from my living room, so if you hear my little dog, Layla, running around, that's what that's about. So let's get started. Some of you have started this PowerPoint already, and some of them it's just finishing, and some of y'all haven't seen it at all. So I'm just going to go through it as if everybody hasn't seen it. Looking at political parties in Texas, political parties get a bad rap a lot of the time, but they're actually an extremely important part of our democratic process for a number of reasons. First, differentiating what a political party is by comparing it to other groups of people with similar interests. Political parties are groups of people who have the same ideological understanding of government. That means that they generally have this similar understanding of the role that government ought to play in society. And their interest or their goal, so to speak, is to try and win control of government. Okay, so they want their members of their party to gain control of government, to win elections, to recruit people who are going to win and then run government, to carry the party label. Okay. And they're very important. We know that they are partisan, and it seems like they're very irritating. They tell us what to do, who to vote for. They're very divided. But they do serve a lot of purposes. They facilitate collective action. They help with policy making. But really, the most important thing that they do is give y'all, as the electorate or the voting class, a label to identify voters. So perhaps you don't know exactly all of the stances of all the politicians in Congress, but you can identify generally some of their policy preferences, where they may stand on certain issues just based on what party they belong to. So you know that, well, perhaps this individual, I don't know exactly what his policy stance on immigration is, but I know that he is a Democrat, so it's probably much more liberal than his conservative counterparts. So in that way, you're able to identify who you more closely will affiliate yourself with, thereby narrowing down your choices for you. Okay. And in Texas, we've had a couple of unique developments that have taken place lately. First, we know that Texas is dominated by one political party, and that party is the Republicans currently, although in history, it has been dominated by the Democratic Party. So we have a strong domination of the Republican Party in Texas currently, but we also have, oh, sorry, that's Layla. But we also have an increasing Latino minority population. So like we said at the beginning of class, we know that urban areas tend to be more liberal. They tend to vote more democratically, and they also currently are growing very quickly. San Antonio is estimated to almost double in population in the next 10 years. Okay? So with that current domination of the Republican Party, plus the addition of more liberal, democratic-leaning urban areas, there may be an upcoming shift in the political parties, or how at least they're organized. But one thing that is pronounced in Texas is the party polarization, in that there's a very divided ideological legislature. Okay, in Texas, the split in Congress between your Democrats and Republicans is very divided, and it causes a lot of controversy with regard to compromise. A lot of people criticize, saying that it's difficult to get things done because our parties are so polarized. That is, not only are you Republican, but you're very Republican, and not only are you liberal, but you're very liberal. Whereas the general electorate in American society tends to be more centered, more moderate. They tend to be a little bit more in the middle. And moving forward, it's important to note how our political parties form, because we know that political parties don't remain the same. We've had several realignments and de-alignments in political parties throughout our American history. We started with the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, the Jeffersonian Democrats and the Whigs. So that occurs in one of two ways, either internal or external mobilization. First, internal mobilization is when there is a under one political party, for example, the Democratic Party, perhaps there is a conflict that causes a group of people within the Democratic Party to feel as though they're marginalized or disenfranchised. And so somebody will mobilize their support, and that person often is within government already. Somebody who already has been elected to an office. You could see this very clearly in 2016 with Bernie Sanders. There was a conflict within the Democratic Party, and somebody who was already internal to government, Bernie Sanders, mobilized the support of the group of people who were marginalized. Okay, the Democratic Socialists, or the Progressive Democrats is what they call themselves. And that has been very pronounced, and it has been a continuing trend up until now. You saw in the 2018 midterm elections that several other people were elected to office that also mobilized the support of the Progressive Democrats, or the Democratic Socialists. On the other hand, there's external mobilization. And external mobilization is very similar in that there's a conflict that breaks out, but the person who mobilizes the support of the group of people who are marginalized are outside of government, okay? And they need to win the support of government, okay? Saw this with the Republicans in 2016 with Donald Trump, okay? There was a politician outside of government. Well, I suppose he wasn't a politician at the time. Somebody outside of government, Donald Trump, mobilized the support of a group of people who felt marginalized within the Republican Party and ended up being very successful. Okay, and so that's external mobilization. Somebody mobilized the support of a group of marginalized citizens, voters, who was not already elected to government. Okay, and that causes realignments. Okay, a realignment or a de-alignment is when there is a new political party that supplants or takes the place of the current majority party. Okay, if the Democratic Socialists or the Progressive Democrats continue this trend, they will likely become the more dominant party within the Democratic Party. Okay, you might have also seen something similar to that in the Tea Party, although they weren't able to completely realign themselves as the dominant party. But if the Democrats currently continue to have this conflict between the Democrats, the traditional establishment Democrats, and the Democratic Progressives or Democratic Socialists continue, and the Democratic Socialists continue to gain more traction, you will see that they become realigned, and the more dominant party is the Democratic Socialists or Progressives. They call themselves Progressive Democrats or Democratic Socialists. They're the same thing. I use them interchangeably. And that can also sometimes cause a divided government. We have a divided government partially now. Okay, and that's when the president is controlled by one party, whereas Congress, or at least one house of Congress, is controlled by a different party. Okay, so currently we have a Republican president, and one house of Congress, the Senate, is still Republican controlled. However, the House of Representatives is controlled by the Democrats. Okay, so our government is currently divided, and that makes it more difficult to get things done. Compromise is a little bit more necessary in order to maintain a functioning legislature. So, one thing that's unique about America and Texas is that we have only two dominant parties, and a lot of people really don't like that. Nobody, well, I shouldn't say, I don't know anybody, and it is more common that people don't fit neatly into any one of the two dominant political parties. That is, while they may fit more in line with the values associated with the Democrats, they can't fully invest themselves in that particular party at this moment. In fact, when you looked at the 2016 election, more often than not, you'd see that somebody had to choose between Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, but they didn't really like either candidate. They weren't all in for either one or the other. And so they say, well, why do we have to have two parties? Why can't we have a successful third party? And that's for a number of reasons. We have single member districts, which means that only one person can represent the district that they are elected from in government. only one person gets that control, versus having a proportional representation like you'll see in England, where you have several members representing that district. And we also have winner-take-all systems, which means that if you win by 20% or you win by a very narrow margin, you still get the entirety of the representation for the whole district. Okay? So what happens here, and it especially happens, is that Texas has first past the post. Okay? First past the post means that whoever gets 50% or more first gets all of the representation. Okay? And there's something called Duverger's Law. And Duverger's Law says in a system that has single-member districts, eventually only two parties will emerge as dominant, because all the other parties will feel as though their votes are wasted. People won't want to vote for them because it's so unlikely that they would win, that they don't want to feel as though they've wasted their vote. Okay? And this implies that in the United States and in Texas, we have we're more dedicated, so to speak, or more attached to our geographic area than we are to our political party. And I think that might have been the case, or the intention at the beginning of our nation, but a lot of people would argue now it's very, strongly connected to political parties, rather than your rather than necessarily your geographic area. Okay, and we've already talked about this a couple of times, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But how you view government and the role that government plays to improve society is called your political socialization. So whether you feel as though you're more in line with the Republicans or the Democrats, all depends on how you've been socialized, right? How your parents have influenced you, your church, your education, your income. All of these things help decide where your party affiliation is. Texas in particular has a very strong political party within our domination of the Tea Party. Very conservative, economically conservative section of the Republican Party. But we know that the people who tend to be able to decide the vote or the outcome of the elections are the people responsible for that are swing voters, people who may vote for one political party or may go the other way. And I think a lot of people y'all's age, 18 to 25, really are swing voters. They may vote Republican, they may vote Democrat. It's really up to the candidate. I mean, and realistically, that's how it should be. That's how our founding fathers wanted it to be. But in any event, we've had a lot of different sections or sects of political parties in Texas. Currently, we still do. We have a contemporary Democratic Party, and these people after Ann Richards lost re-election for governor have really been on the decline, okay? These are people who would classify themselves as liberals. They tend to be African American, Latinos, or white liberals in urban areas. So people who live in cities, African Americans, and Latinos. In fact, I think it's 80% of African Americans in Texas voted Democratically. And 7 of the 9 Democrats in Texas Congress currently are Latino or African American. In fact, that might be a little bit higher now because Wendy Davis didn't run again. We also have your contemporary Republican Party. These are not the same as your Tea Party conservatives, Tea Party Republicans. But they're the ones who currently dominate our statewide offices here. Okay. We've had a couple of movements or factions within the Republican Party as well, like the Occupy movement, who they actually fit more closely with the Democrats. They didn't like the influence of banking industry and Wall Street and politics. They felt that they were their influence was more important than the average citizen. You might remember it as being the 99%. In Texas, however, we have the Tea Party, which is a very, very strong, very economically conservative movement in Texas. They are very anti-taxation, which tends to imply that they're anti-social spending. Social services and education they feel is best left to private entities. somebody like Rick Perry really championed this, followed by